increasing our tree canopy. As a volunteer, which I plan on becoming a team leader in the future. I help educate people on why urban forestry and growing the canopy matters. At first glance, it might seem like tree planting is just a weekend service project, but it's actually deeply tied to questions of environmental justice and public policy and urban tree planting. We specifically plant in Ward 7 and 8, where there are low-income minority communities who suffer from urban heat islands and environmental injustice. So moving on to the research process, the topic of framing was difficult to grasp. And if it were not for the help of an Eccles librarian, Elizabeth Kuntz, my paper would not have turned out the way it did. What I was looking for were local DC media articles that were about trees and how they view their impact. And this was not an easy task. But when I came in on a cold November day in Eccles, Mrs. Kuntz had already found multiple articles that I could use, as well as other various types of sources that could contribute to my paper. So soon enough, I already knew how my paper would come together. She first gave me two articles from the DCS and WAMU, and those were really great local sources that talked extensively about the urban tree canopy. DCS was also one of my most important sources to my research because this media source was created by volunteers in DC, and it has a very unique history. And both of these articles contributed to the social progress framework I came up with. I ended up researching, and writing about, which I will talk about later. And yeah, Ms. Kuntz also helped me find a resource that Casey Trees, the organization I was working with, had actually published. And this was significant to me because it helped me frame my communication plan to Casey Trees, which was my audience, and how to address the problem. And this allowed me not to come up with something from scratch, but simply just redirect Casey Trees into reframing the frameworks that the media has used. So yeah, and one last source I used was the GW library database, which helped me explain what the academia thinks about trees. And clicking on the popular databases website, I used ProQuest, which thanks to my UW librarian, Emily Blumenthal, who showed my class how to use it, was very helpful. And after I would say a few hours of researching, I finally found an article that was very helpful. And it kind of taught me that persistence is actually needed in research, and you're not going to find immediately what you needed uh, in the first thing that you see. So much of the beginning of my paper is actually based on the resources that my professor had used. And uh, this made it actually easy to write because she gave me the resources I needed to make the base of my paper. And yeah, you guys are probably wondering what I'm talking about, what the words I'm throwing at you are. And so next slide, let's talk about what framing is. When we think about the role of the media, we often assume that its primary function is to report facts. And while that is true, the media does simply more than inform. It actively shapes our public understanding and influences how policymakers approach different issues. The way a story is framed can impact whether a person views a problem as an individual responsibility or a collective challenge, which in turn affects policy decisions and public support for solutions. There are two dominant types of media framing, that are particularly relevant in shaping our discourse: episodic framing and thematic framing. Episodic framing focuses on individual cases or isolated events which can make problems appear as personal struggles rather than broader societal issues. For example, a news story that highlights a single homeowner struggling to plant trees in their yard frames urban forestry as an individual effort rather than a policy issue. In contrast, thematic framing takes a broader approach, emphasizing systemic challenges and policy solutions. So, a news report discussing how the urban tree canopy coverage is lower in marginalized communities, contributing to the urban heat islands I was talking about, exemplifies how thematic framing can present this issue as one that requires systemic change and structural intervention. So my research examined how these DC-based media outlets, these local sources, discuss urban tree canopy and the way their framing choices influence both community and perceptions and the policymaker decisions. The media has the power to shape public attitudes toward or urban forestry, either by encouraging engagement and or by reinforcing the missing conceptions that hinder our progress. So understanding whether coverage leans more toward episodic or thematic framing can provide insight into whether the media narratives are helping or hurting our urban forestry efforts that Casey Trees does in DC. So ultimately, my research aims to ask the question of how does the media coverage contribute to meaningful action? And it's the better we can understand this, the better we can understand how the media can be leveraged to promote effective policies that help urban forestry. So, in analyzing the media coverage of the urban tree canopy in DC, I identified several key framing patterns that influence how the public and the policymakers perceive the role of trees in our environment. These frames don't just reflect different viewpoints, they actively shape our support for our initiatives. And first major one I found is I researched was the social progress frame, which presents trees as essential to climate resilience and public health. The media uses this frame to highlight how urban trees reduce heat islands and filter pollutants and provide crucial environmental and societal benefits. This framing supports the idea that trees are a necessary part of urban planning and a public good that benefits all residents, especially those in low-income, marginalized communities that often lack the green space. However, what I also found was that another common narrative is the crime and safety frame, which suggests that trees contribute to crime by providing cover for illegal activities. And there's actually a lot of research on this. And this framing, though persistent in some media coverage, contradicts research, showing that well-maintained green spaces can actually do the opposite and reduce crime, fostering community engagement and increasing visibility in public areas. But even despite this evidence, this frame can make policymakers hesitant to support tree planting efforts because it's such a wide myth in certain neighborhoods. And this just reinforces environmental disparities. And these competing narratives directly impact how communities and our decision makers engage with our KC trees and our initiatives. If the media consistently portrays trees as essential for public health and climate resilience, it would foster support. But if it emphasizes the crime concerns or treats trees as non-essential, it can hinder our efforts. And that's why organizations like KC Trees must take an active role in shaping this narrative and ensuring that the public and policymakers understand the true value of urban trees and the long-term benefits they can provide. So moving on, the way the media frames urban tree canopy um, has a lot of challenges. A major concern is how framing uh, affects funding priorities. When trees are presented as aesthetics rather than as infrastructure, policymakers may fail to allocate the necessary resources for uh, planting and maintenance. Cities facing budget constraints can often focus on what they perceive as essential services, and if trees are not framed as part of that category, that risk can become overlooked. And so, understanding that trees are a key solution for urban heat reduction and air quality improvement is crucial to securing long-term investment. And going back to what I said about the crime, as you can see on this graph, it's actually the opposite. If you look at the key, it says the purple region for the crime map is around War II. And if you look on the tree canopy graph, there's actually 0 to 20% trees in those regions. And the ones where on the crime map where it's yellow and not much crime, there's actually more tree canopy there. So the myth was actually just totally, completely wrong. And it was honestly bewildering to find that out. And so this is why it was important for Casey Trees to actively engage with the media. And some of the solutions I proposed was creating catchphrases to counter those myths, such as stopping the red heat with the green breeze or something catchy. And this framed my communication plan to give to Casey Trees, and that by continuing our myth busting campaign that we began last year that already addressed the violent crime net framework, we have to give the opposite message that trees actually increase the visibility by encouraging others to go outside and enjoy the shade. It's about returning the narrative and flipping it over on its head. So that was really the basis for my communication plan. And yeah, just focusing on counteracting the myth, but also it's important not to just focus on the challenges, but also provide a solution to them. So yeah, that was a big part of what I did for my communication plan. And so my experience with Casey Trees was instrumental in shaping my understanding of urban forestry, not just from an academic perspective, but from a deeply personal and a community-based perspective as well. While my research focused on media framing and influencing public perceptions, my direct service with Casey Trees also gave me some insights into what into the research that I wouldn't have just gained from just studying it academically. Engaging in the tree plantings and working alongside volunteers provided a firsthand experience that I could see how the people interact with green spaces and the residents and what the trees actually mean to them. And one of the important lessons I learned is that framing isn't just about the media narratives, it's also about the values you learn. Seeing how people responded to initiatives made it clear that their attitudes toward urban forestry were shaped by more than just news coverage. They were influenced by the history, the local challenges, and the personal connections to the neighborhoods as well. And that's something you can't just research. And you actually have to directly experience it. And so some of these community members saw trees as a critical investment in their lives, while others were just skeptical and had past concerns of because of past neglect by the government, by the DC, by DC City Council, or just a lack of resources that would not allow them to have long-term maintenance. So these experiences ultimately deepened my understanding of how environmental issues are lived and felt on the ground and beyond what is just written on articles and policy papers.
God,
And,
what?
yeah, and so all in all, the biggest thing I could take away is
Are
scholarship
you
is
doing
a
like
two-way
a
street, and we take knowledge from communities, but we also owe them knowledge in return. And this
is
means
there
that academic research shouldn't just be analyzing the problems from a distance, it should be actively contributing to solutions by amplifying the community voices and also informing better policy decisions. Thank you.
Great job, Raghav. It's really, really interesting to see um, how like really great analysis, but new insights that came from being on the ground with Casey Trees as well. Like really great. So everyone be holding on to those questions. And next we're going to bring up a slide deck for Sienna Vaughn. And again, Sienna worked with no, I don't have my notes, Mosaic and DC Legal Aid, I believe.
yeah, correct.
Let me pull these up. All right. Here we go.
Right. Hi, I'm Sienna, and this was the title of my paper, Cryptocurrency, a Revolutionary Digital Promise. So, first, can we go to the next slide? The first thing I wanted to talk about was what my paper was about and what my findings were about. So, I was taking a class about refugees, and that was the focus of my university writing class. And so I wanted to find an interesting way to tie problems that refugees deal with to solutions that could improve their experience. And so I found these connections to cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is a completely anonymous currency that is decentralized. So it's not tied to any government. It's not based off of US dollars or euros, but it has its own value that comes from how many people want it. So it can be similar to stocks with if there's increased demand, the price of it will increase. And also because cryptocurrency is like this online kind of like made up idea, it's completely portable, accessible from any part of the world. And a lot of people can download apps that make it really easy to pay with cryptocurrency, similarly to Apple Pay, or to access banking really easily and transfer money, like super easy to understand. So there are a lot of characteristics that make cryptocurrency actually really attractive to refugees. The first is that it's untraceable. So because refugees are fleeing persecution from their home country, it can be really dangerous for them if the government can track where their credit card spending is happening, because it allows them to get tracked down and then potentially punished. And so because cryptocurrency is untraceable, that has a lot of unique benefits to them. There's also a lot of robberies and attacks that refugees have to deal with at any point in their journey. It's something that we learned a lot about in my class, and that I read a lot about. So when people are leaving to a new place, they oftentimes have to carry all of their belongings on their back, which can mean they're carrying all of their cash with them. So throughout any point in their journey, if a smuggler comes up and decides to take their belongings, or if they end up facing some kind of attack, then they can be left with virtually nothing. There's also attacks on migration camps. So when people are in camps, they think that they're safe, but there are quite common attacks on refugees in those camps where people steal all of their belongings. There are also sometimes where authority figures, such as Greek police officers, involved in tons of scandal, will actually arrest refugees and then take all of their belongings. So all of these instances can leave refugees without access to cash. And so because of that, it's safe for them for them to have some kind of banking system. There are also a lot of barriers to banking. So in the United States, we typically use credit cards and formal banking institutions, but in other countries, they oftentimes rely on cash. So people might not have a credit score, they might not be able to purchase loans, or to access loans or access banking institutions. Some banks don't even allow people in the United States to access their bank if they fall under immigrant status. And so cryptocurrency does offer a safe place for people, or a relatively safe place for people to put their money, that does not have any barriers to access. And the last benefit is that sometimes it can help people escape volatility. So in certain countries, like Venezuela is an example that I talked about in my paper, they have tons of inflation, tons of economic problems. And so what people will do in Venezuela is, after they get a paycheck, they'll immediately purchase a token, and then it allows them to, cryptocurrency is less volatile than their home country's actual economy. And so it allows them to have money that is accessible and that they can use. There are 3 places that I mostly focused on for my project, which were Ukraine. So after the Ukraine war, I found an example of someone who immediately transferred his funds to cryptocurrency and was able to escape the country significantly quicker because he didn't have to go to banks and ATMs and access all of his cash. And so because of that, he had portable savings with him. I also focused on Venezuela, the same way I was just talking about, with people using cryptocurrency within the country and when they're ready to leave the country because it's portable, and avoids volatility. And also Uganda, where they actually have the United Nations and different aid programs are giving out aid through cryptocurrency, and that's how they're delivering monetary aid. They also use cryptocurrency to then help with identification, and there are a ton of different systems that they're implementing institutionally. With that being said, there are also some downsides to cryptocurrency. And so this slide makes it seem like it's generally really safe and that there are no downsides, especially compared to all the benefits. And that's not necessarily the case. It's just I tried to focus on fewer downsides for my paper. The first was volatility aspects. So while sometimes people use cryptocurrency to escape volatility, cryptocurrency can also be more volatile than a country's original economy because it's determined by how many people want it. There are also a ton of new cryptocurrency tokens that are always popping up. There are ones that are scams. There are ones that are just not mature enough yet to be stable. But I also talk about my paper how this problem is kind of solving itself. As cryptocurrency as an industry matures, there are more regulations, and also certain companies like Bitcoin and Ethereum do have relatively stable tokens, which allow people who do a lot of research to find tokens that they actually can rely on. There's also a problem of crime. So because cryptocurrency is untraceable, a lot of people end up using cryptocurrency to avoid regulation. And because of that, a lot of countries are trying to regulate cryptocurrency more to try to stop criminals. So if people are buying a lot of cryptocurrency hoping it will be anonymous, it does leave the risk that when cryptocurrency starts to get more regulated, that they can end up being targeted. Those were the general focuses of my paper, and the conclusion that I came to is that cryptocurrency should be used by more people as long as it's safe, as in they do more research to make sure they're buying the right kind of token and not necessarily putting in all their assets. But for refugees, I found that it actually can be incredibly helpful because it allows them to bring their money with them in a much more safe way. So now I'll talk about what I learned in class. as I mentioned, my class was mostly focused on refugees and their experience. We did talk a lot about Syrian refugees, and there were a few concepts that really stuck with me and helped to inform my research. The first was the idea that there are over 117 million people worldwide who are forcibly displaced at the end of 2023. And this number does make it easy to just kind of see this number and not really connect it to anything. But through class, we watched so many documentaries and we saw so many people talk about how difficult their experience was. And so it was so difficult to imagine that happening on such a large scale with so many people. And it really showed me that this is an issue that needs to be researched and there needs to be more solutions to make this experience a little bit more tolerable for refugees. Another idea that we talked about is that many refugees don't have the required documents to get into new countries. They might leave their birth certificate or passport behind. And if that is left behind or they can't find that, then it is nearly impossible to get into new places. So people are left with literally nowhere to go. And trying to imagine that was really difficult because people really have the worst experience possible. And the final idea was that 75% of refugees get hosted in low or middle income countries. So a lot of countries that should be taking refugees and have the capacity to accept more people are not doing that. And because of that, it ends up being very difficult for refugees to find jobs, to get settled in places where they're accepted and where they have the ability to start new lives well. So part of my class was to do 12 hours of community service, which really, really helped inform my paper. It's on the next slide. I did work at Mosaic at the beginning of the semester, or at the same time that I about started writing this. And Mosaic helps with creating a lot of programs to help refugees get acclimated in the United States. It's based in Virginia, or at least they have headquarters in Arlington, I believe. And I helped advertise their professional career development series that they were doing. So they had workshops every Sunday that refugees could go to and then learn about how to create resumes, about how to interview well, finding access to new jobs. So I called a lot of people and learned about their past work experience in other countries and got to know them a little bit, made sure there were accommodations to make sure they could actually get to the location, that they were free during the time. And having those conversations really opened my eyes to the difficulty of starting a completely new life because a lot of people had incredible jobs and went through significant education in their home countries, but that didn't transfer over in the United States and they no longer have the time or money to be able to completely start from scratch. So they end up having to find jobs that they are overqualified for. And it furthered this idea of people having to start completely new lives. It got me thinking about everything it would take to build a new life. And that is kind of what helped lead me into cryptocurrency because I started thinking about money, about banking. Something that really stuck with me was the robberies that I kept hearing about people having all their belongings being taken from them. And I had done a little bit of research on cryptocurrency in high school. So I started thinking about that as a method of making the experience, as I mentioned, like slightly more tolerable. So now I'll talk a little bit about the writing process. First, I interviewed Roger Nober. He's the director of the GW Regulatory Study Center, and he had done a panel on cryptocurrency regulation, I think 2 or 3 years ago. So I did an interview with him, and he really helped me understand the different complexities of cryptocurrency. And he also helped me really hone my paper into just banking. I was originally going to talk about blockchain, helping healthcare and decreasing starvation, but it really helped me realize that there's so much talk about just within banking. And so he gave me a lot of ideas of where to start with and things to research, which led to my next part, which was the research itself. So we got a talk from a librarian about how to use the different scholarly sources. I mostly use ProQuest and JSTOR, and it helped me just use kind of random searches like refugees and cryptocurrency and playing around a lot with that. There are not many studies about refugees and cryptocurrency because cryptocurrency is so new and because you can't track the demographics of the people using them since it's an anonymous platform. So a lot of my research did have to be done by just kind of finding programs that already exist by searching completely random things in Google. Like I might search the name of a country that has a big refugee population and then cryptocurrency next to it and see what I could find. And that was really the way that helped inform a lot of my process. And then find academic sources that correlated with that. And then outlining, which is a really big part of my process. So on the next slide, I kind of show my outline looked like. It was an absolute mess. This is like actually what it looked like, very just kind of throwing things together. But I was able to create my thesis by figuring out that I wanted to talk about the benefits, the harms, places that cryptocurrency was being used in, and the different ways it was being used. And so when I was able to create, like, first I'll talk about this, then I'll talk about this, then I'll talk about this, creating sections really helped me just structure my ideas, create a thesis, and know what I wanted to talk about. On the next slide, I show an example of what I made my outline look like. And so now that I had these sections of what I wanted each thing to, what I wanted each part to talk about, I would do all these kind of random searches, find journals and find academic sources, and then copy and paste helpful quotes in and literally just comment the link to the article so I could do citations later. And this way, when I was writing my paper, I had this outline that already had all my quotes together. I knew the exact order of how I want everything to fit. And so I would just kind of paraphrase each quote, which is something we also learned how to do in my class. And then that helped me write my paper much easier. On the next slide, there's an example of in class, we did an activity once where we had to like write up a brief summary of our interview. So I would literally just paste everything into this outline. I wrote like full paragraphs sometimes in my outline and then just paste things in. So I really just used it as a doc to help me center myself before I wrote the real thing. The next part of my process was revisions, and this is what I by far spent the most amount of time doing. I first went to the writing center after I had my first draft, so that way they just went through the whole thing with me and helped me work on my sentence structure, helped me make sure everything connected to my thesis. And then that way I was able to do a lot of self-revisions after going to the writing center. They gave me a lot of things to work on. So then I went to office hours with my professor and she helped me so much. I highly recommend it because your professor is the person that's grading your essay. And so she told me what she wanted to see more of, what I should take out, completely helped me with citations. Like I thought I understood how to do them. I really did not. So I highly recommend going to office hours with your professor, and I learned so much from that. And then self-revisions. So I would do a whole run through where I'm looking at making sure my sentence structure is always correct, a whole run through making sure my grammar is always correct, trying to replace to be verbs like is and was with more descriptive verbs. And I just did a ton of like reading through it and making sure everything made sense. And that took me hours, but it made me, it allowed me to turn in a paper that I felt confident in. And then I did a lot of community service at the end of my project with Legal Aid DC. Their goal is to defend tenants in landlord and tenant court. So if a landlord is trying to get a tenant kicked out because they're not paying their rent, or a tenant is claiming that a landlord is not helping to maintain the space properly, that all happens in landlord and tenant court. And DC Legal Aid helps to defend tenants. And so I would go and take notes about all of the different court proceedings and then sort a lot of the notes that I had about how landlord and tenant court worked. This might seem kind of far off from cryptocurrency, but it ended up informing my research in the sense that it talks about a lot of vulnerable groups do end up becoming susceptible, or they end up getting hurt the most by recessions and economic downturns. And so many people in the past few years have been really affected by recessions in the United States. As cryptocurrency becomes more prominent and people are starting to rely on cryptocurrency more to stay away from government currencies that are volatile, and as cryptocurrency becomes less volatile, it really does offer an extra pathway for vulnerable groups to stay a little bit more protected and to have access to separate banking that is anonymous. So working at DC Legal Aid kind of reminded me that there is so much hope and promise for what cryptocurrency can be as it develops and as it continues to grow. And so while my paper mostly focused on the ways that refugees can start to use cryptocurrency more and the ways that they already are using it all around the world, there's a lot of hope that cryptocurrency can also be used in the United States to help people here.
That is terrific. Thank you so, so much, everyone. I am going to, I have a few questions, but I feel like I want to let the room have their opportunity to ask some. Does anyone want to put a question in the chat, or you can unmute and pose your question if you like?
So with more conflicts that are like emerging globally, do you think that cryptocurrency could serve as a good crutch for people as the 2020s kind of develop? Like as the technology gets better for cryptocurrency, do you think that'll facilitate people's ability to kind of carry their wealth across borders if they have to flee?
Yes, definitely. That's something that I completely think will help because as more refugee crises happen and pop up, it does really help people to have portable savings that they can bring anywhere that are completely anonymous.
I'm seeing there's at least one person here that is not a GW student, but is from one of the community organizations. There's Valerie's here from Casey Trees. If you or if anyone else in the quote unquote room is from a community organization connected to these projects, and you want to jump in and lend your response or feedback, we would love to hear it. My first question is about your initial interest in your research topic. Because you have a research paper to choose a topic for, and you also have a service experience to choose. So it makes sense that your interest would be, equally drawn to both. But I'm wondering to what extent your experience in the community helped you narrow in what your research topic would be. Or was it the other way around, where you did you pick a research topic and then find a community organization that would help inform it?
It's a good question. So yeah, my organization I worked with, Casey Trees, it's very environmental, and I've only actually found this passion last semester. In the beginning, I always knew I wanted to do political science. That was my first major. But yeah, just with all the news about climate change, it kind of seemed something I was interested in, and so Casey Trees was something I wanted to dive into. But volunteering in general was something I've always had done in high school. I actually did nothing environmentally related, which is funny, but I did volunteer in hospitals, and that type of volunteering is very much different from the volunteering I did with Casey Trees. So it's very interesting the different types of volunteering you can do and the lessons you can take away. I would say the volunteering I did in the hospital with just the care is very there's a very human touch to the just with the patients and interacting with them as well. And there are similarities, even if the work does seem very different with the hospital work and the Casey Trees work. Because although I was mostly planting trees with Casey Trees, there was also the human aspect with the residents and also with your fellow team members as well. So yeah, just those, even though I was not doing anything environmentally related in my previous volunteering, I think just being in that environment and being able to interact with the people you are helping just carries over into what you're doing next.
I also completely agree that being surrounded by people who can be affected by your project really helps. I kind of figured out my topic based on like a speech and debate topic I had in high school, like of learning cryptocurrency about it originally and then learning about the connection to refugees. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted my topic of my paper to be on, but then when I started thinking about the ways that people have to completely restart their lives, and the aspects of how difficult that is through my work with Mosaic, it really made sure that I did pick that topic. And I also cared so much more about the research that I was doing because I had met people that would be affected by the impacts of cryptocurrency being more widespread. And so by the end of doing this paper, I really put the time into revising it, into making it a paper that I'm proud of because I had met people that would be affected by it. And that made me care so much about what I was writing, and I think made it a much stronger paper.
That is awesome. Chaden, I see your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Hello? Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Yes, I do have a question. My question is for you, Sienna. So I was just wondering, because I know you mentioned, I think something we're all familiar with is that cryptocurrency is, a new tool and a new way to do finance that we may not be familiar with. So my question is, with the advancement of AI, how might that, play a role in helping these vulnerable populations and refugees in accessing cryptocurrency?
I definitely think AI can help because I think it makes it so much easier to understand things in general. Like when you're looking something up on Google and now AI creates a kind of prompt that really walks you through everything and is so specific to your question, it can definitely help people find the apps that are best for them by using like ChatGPT to put in the requirements of what they're looking for. And it can also help people research cryptocurrency because that's something I did talk about. Like I do think it's so important to find the right token. So I definitely do agree that AI will help people understand how to use cryptocurrency better in a way that um, is more accessible to them.
Other questions? Here's one from Annie. How did you guys come up with your outlines? Was it based on the research or your main ideas? And also, how much background did you give your papers before actually going into the research you found? Good question.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I kind of formed my outline based on the sources I found, and obviously with the frameworks I had to research, it was kind of like a fluid outline because I could find more frameworks or I only had a certain amount. So I just framed it with first laying out the introduction and giving a base of the general idea of what framing was, because that was really what we were learning in class in the unit. And then after giving that base, I narrowed it down to specifically Casey trees. And I think I did the approach of giving the problem and the frameworks and what's happening, and then following that up with the solution, which was the communication plan, and that came after I described the frameworks. But yeah, it was not something that was really strict. Want I didn't want it to be something like the outline was something that I immediately knew from the beginning. It was just as long as I went through my research, I kind of found like how they fit in together, like which framework would I describe first. And yeah, like that just is something that as I did my research, I just made it was my own decision about how that would work together and just what was more fluid and what came out more naturally.
My outline was really informed by Professor Hijazi's lessons in class because she gave us a complete structure of like one page should be for your introduction, and then 1 to 2 pages can be for your narration. So there were a ton of resources that my professor gave me that you'll also likely get that really helped me create a very general idea. Then when I got my topic and I had my interview, it became clear to me that I wanted to focus on the benefits and harms. So I came up with a really, really general outline of like, here I'll talk about 3 benefits of cryptocurrency, here I'll talk about 3 harms, and here I'll talk about places it's being utilized in. And then I really used the research to like create the actual outline. So once I had those sections, I would look for research and quotes to fill in parts of those sections and figure out exactly which section would be. And that's when I pasted quotes into my doc and kept track of where I was getting them from. And then for background about my paper, that was actually so difficult because cryptocurrency explaining it was like one of the biggest challenges of my paper because I wanted to explain it properly because if you don't understand cryptocurrency, you won't understand the content of the paper. But if I explained too much, I would just confuse people. So I literally wrote like I knew I was supposed to write like about a page to 2 pages, and then I read it to my mom and I was like, "Do you understand what cryptocurrency is from this?" I read it to my roommate and was like, "What do you think?" And in class when we did peer review, I took advantage of that. So I literally just asked like everyone I knew. I was like, "Do you understand cryptocurrency now?" And I got a lot of feedback from that. So also just, using your friends and the people around you to make sure that you're properly explaining things and they can give you a lot of helpful insight. I have not bought crypto. I'm actually thinking about it though, but ask me again in a year.
Good question. Good question.
So, Raghav, I have a question about Casey trees. I was intrigued. If I recall, on your concluding slide, you mentioned that it can be beneficial for organizations like Casey Trees to engage with the media. I'm wondering if you see social media as a viable avenue for organizations to use to almost to some extent bypass the need to earn media attention, have an angle and hook for your story. And also, if that is the case, are there any downsides?
No, yeah, that is a great point. And actually, I just met with Valerie, who Wendy mentioned, and she was actually telling me to actually like repost the stuff that Casey Trees was talking about on my social media. So yeah, social media is definitely a useful source. And although I didn't talk about it in my paper, it is something that I've actually talked about and would have helped my paper because there's a big audience with social media and a lot of stuff goes viral there. And there are some downsides if misinformation, because even not from Casey Trees, but from other organizations, and something goes viral and it's not true, and then but everyone believes it because it's just going viral, then that can create a problem. But yeah, for Casey Trees, that would be a great avenue to just put out the right information and utilize like TikTok and Instagram and those reels that everyone just scrolls right through. And yeah, for sure.
I wonder if the two of you have, I'm going to keep asking the community engagement questions. I wonder if the two of you have advice for students who are have an interest in a social issue or in a specific community or with a community organization. If you have advice for them on connecting research writing or connecting other coursework to their interests there, like how to get started, or any tips on once you're started, make sure you this, make sure you don't this. I wonder if there are any pieces of advice you would have.
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, I think it's from my perspective, it's always good to go with an open mind, into the organization you're working with, and not have any biases about it, and just see what it's about. And it's important to be doing something not just for the sake of volunteering, but it's something that you're passionate about. Because immediately once you're passionate about it, you already have an incentive to actually do the work and interact with people. Interaction is a very important thing. Don't just do the work, talk to the people, build relationships. It's very important. It makes your work a lot more enjoyable, and also it makes everyone else also happy to be around you. And that really honestly just was very helpful for me to just learn from the other volunteers as well. And also, yeah, building my paper, Casey Trees, um, it was just an organization that I immediately, when I first started working with them, I really enjoyed my work there. And it was just, I knew that was an organization for me. But it's also good to try out different types of organizations. Be persistent with your emailing. If you want to find out something, a lot of times they won't answer on your first email. So make sure to send a few emails and just, yeah, find out anything you can about them and just try to go to that first event and see what they're all about. Is what I would say.
I have three main pieces of advice. The first thing is get started early. In terms of finding organizations, you can definitely talk to professors and they will have tons of ideas for you. My professor gave us like a lot of different places that we could connect with. So start as early as possible. A lot of places start their applications for community service like a month before the semester starts or right at the beginning of the month. And there's background checks you have to go through. All different types of things you have to do. So get started right away. The second thing I would say is be very patient because these organizations do have a lot to deal with, and a lot of times they don't have a lot of people. And so them bringing you onto their team is so that you can learn from them, but ultimately it might not be their number one top priority, and you have to kind of be understanding about that. So yes, definitely follow up and be persistent because they might need that extra reminder, but also being very patient and kind to people that you're working with. And then my last thing is that the people that you're working with oftentimes don't need your pity. Like a lot of the refugees that I was talking to on the phone are incredibly established, incredibly educated, and just because they have to start new lives, that just shows how strong they are. Not that I should be looking down to them in any way or treating them that way. So even though we do community service to help people, they don't need our pity and they are independent and competent people. So making sure you have that mindset when you're going into community service.
Thank you, both of you. Golden advice from both of you. Thanks so much. Anyone else? Well, before we wrap things up, I did want to make one announcement slash encouragement to everyone who's on this call about the JCC prize for research writing that is connected to Washington, D.C. And Professor Ryder's on the call, so she may want to jump in and make this announcement herself. But the idea behind this prize, it's you submit it in mid to late May. And it can be at work that you did for a class. That way that you've got lots of peer review feedback probably and faculty feedback, and you can keep working on your piece. But the parameters of it is that it's research writing, and it needs to be about places in DC, issues in DC, people in DC. And it's a very special writing prize, specifically for those kinds of research projects. And it's for any undergraduate to apply for, but I would absolutely encourage a student to submit a UW 1020 paper, because first years have won the prize from their UW 1020 paper before. It has happened. And thank you, Dr. Ryder, for posting the link there with more information on the JCC prize.
And I'll just add that in addition to the research prize, we now have a prize for creative writing that's focused on DC. And then if you've really done a project, and you can say more about this one, Wendy, that's about civic engagement with DC and really developing the kinds of relationships that Sienna was just talking about to build projects together. So it's a great prize. There will be a ceremony in October for the winners, and I encourage you to come.
Yes, so all three prizes are great. The connecting thread there is it's about connecting with our city, Washington, D.C. One's a research writing prize, one's a creative writing prize, and the third prize is for your actual service project. So if you have a completed project that you did in DC working with a nonprofit or DC government agency that you'd like to submit, please, we encourage you to do that. It's a great opportunity. All right, unless anyone